Back in November, we saw the release of The Hunger Games: The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, the movie describing the events of the 10th Hunger Games. This movie was an adaptation of the original book, and while it did a good job capturing the essence of the source material, some deviations were inevitable. So let's talk about the events of The Hunger Games as it was described in the book, and I can tell you, the difference is huge. First, let's summarize the tributes who will not be in the games. District 1 tributes, Facet and Wolverine, were shot in the arena while trying to escape during the rebel bombing. District 2 tributes, Marcus and Sabine, also tried to escape the arena during the bombing, and Sabine was shot immediately, while Marcus was caught a few days later and displayed in the arena, just like it was in the movie. District 5 tribute, Hai, unexpectedly died of asthma the night before the games. District 6 tributes, Otto and Jenny, were killed by the explosion during the bombing of the arena. District 9 tributes, Penlo and Schiff, were wounded by the explosions during the bombing of the arena, and a few days later died as well. District 10 girl, Brandy, was shot after she attacked and killed her mentor because she was taunting her with a sandwich. And as a matter of fact, instead of a bottle, she used a table knife brought by her mentor. Now let's visualize the arena. It was a huge, state-of-the-art amphitheater that used to be the site for sporting, entertainment or military events, and sometimes high-profile executions of the enemies. And since the arena was a symbol of the capital power, during the war it was one of the main targets for the rebel bombers. While the original structure stood, it was battered and unstable now, useful only as a venue for the Hunger Games. The field of grass was long dead, and it was riddled with bomb craters. The arena was covered with rubble from the wartime explosions, chunks of metal and stone, and it was encircled by a 15-feet-tall wall. So each year the tributes were locked in the arena, only with a variety of swords, knives and maces. They didn't have any long-range weapons, unlike it was shown in the movie. At the end of the games, the victor was sent back home, 23 bodies removed, and the arena was locked until the next year. There was no maintenance and no cleanup, so the bloodstains were hopefully washed away by rain, since the arena had no roof. The arena building itself had lots of tunnels, corridors and halls, and also a lobby, because it used to function as a regular theater. And now let's move to the games. The mentors were sitting in the Heavensby Hall, and each of them had a bright yellow badge with the word mentor, and also a communicuff, a device that was buckled onto the wrist and featured a small screen where the amount of sponsor gifts blinked in red. So the mentors had to scroll down the list of the food items, select one from the menu and double-click on it, and this item would be sent by a drone. And by the way, in the book, Clemencia, who was bitten by the snakes, has been cured by this moment, so she was present as well. However, the snake bites left some weird effect on her, so Clemencia had slightly yellow eyes, and some of her skin had scales, just like a snake. Just like in the movie, the host of the games was Lucretius or Lucky Flickerman.
A man who needs no introduction. Weatherman, amateur magician, first ever host of the Hunger Games.
But in the book, he also brought his pet parrot, Jubilee, that was a sick and depressed bird, and Lucky Flickerman was trying to make it say "Hi Handsome" to Casca Highbottom. So after some introduction by the host, the mentors saw the arena on a giant screen. There was a pair of steel poles, around 20 feet high, and joined by a crossbeam of the same length. At the center of the structure, there was Marcus, who was hung by his wrists, and as it was shown in the movie, he was badly battered. And obviously, Sejanus didn't like it, so he threw his chair into the screen, yelled, and ran away.
The monsters! All of you!
And immediately, the gong sounded, and the Hunger Games began. The tributes scattered, most of them ran into the tunnels. Lucy Gray ran to the far side of the arena and hid somewhere, and only a few tributes, the strongest ones, Tanner, Coral, Jessup and Reaper, ran to grab some weapons. But they also dispersed, so only Reaper was left in the arena, being armed with a pitchfork and a long knife. Seeing that he doesn't have anyone to fight, he climbed into the stands and began to wait. A very good strategy, according to Thanos.
What will you do?
Wait.
So unlike it was shown in the movie, there was absolutely no bloodbath in the beginning. And most importantly, nobody threw up and spoiled a clean floor.
Disgusting. Miss Phipps, please, if you're going to vomit, do it off camera.
30 minutes later, Lamina showed up. She was a tribute from District 7 that specialized in lumber, a skinny blonde girl who was wearing a flour sack as a dress. She took an axe and a knife and went to Marcus. Then she easily climbed on top of the structure, which is quite logical, because back home she must have spent a lot of time climbing trees. She exchanged a few words with Marcus, and then she drove the axe blade into Marcus's neck 3 times until he was dead. And after that, she broke the restraints on his wrists, and Marcus fell to the ground. Lamina's mentor, Pliny, decided to send her some water with a drone. He placed an order, but it took 5 minutes for the drone to appear, and just like it was in the movie, it crashed.
These drones are not very good.
However, in the book, the game makers are a bit more fair, so 10 minutes later a replacement drone appeared, and this time Lamina managed to get the bottle, but the drone itself crashed as well. Lamina stayed on the beam, as it was a relatively safe place, and meanwhile Reaper occasionally was walking around the stands. And for the next 10 hours, nothing else happened. But in the evening, at around 7:30, District 3 tributes, Cirque and Tesley, the technical kids, crawled out of the barricade. They seemed to be more interested in the drones rather than tributes, so after getting some food and water from the mentors, they took the drones and disappeared again. At the same time, Reaper, who took a walk into the tunnels, found Dale, who was sick with tuberculosis and was barely alive, so he brought her into the arena and placed her on a piece of wood. Dale's mentor sent her some water, but while Reaper was distracted, Trish, District 7 tribute, quickly ran to the water bottles, stole them and ran away into a large crack in the wall. And half an hour later, Dale, after having a final bout of coughing, went still, with blood dropping from her mouth, and Lucky Flickerman announced that she was done. So in the book, Lucy Gray did not poison Dale, and tuberculosis did the job by itself. The first day of the games was over, and the mentors were sent home. And when Coriolanus came home, he saw an unexpected guest. It was Mrs. Plinth, who was the mother of Sejanus, and she came there because she couldn't find Sejanus anywhere. After a small chat, Mrs. Plinth was going to leave, but suddenly she froze, because on the TV screen she saw Sejanus being in the arena. He was putting breadcrumbs on Marcus's body, as a tradition from District 2, that was the birthplace of both Sejanus and Marcus. And exactly at this moment, the phone rang, and when Coriolanus answered, Volumnia Gall said that either Coriolanus or Mrs. Plinth is supposed to lure Sejanus out of the arena, and both of them are supposed to be there in 20 minutes. When they arrived, Volumnia Gall, Casca Highbottom, and a bunch of peacekeepers were waiting outside of the arena, and after a short discussion, Dr. Gall decided that Coriolanus is supposed to go inside the arena and persuade Sejanus to leave. Unlike it was in the movie, in the book, Coriolanus was given body armor, and also was equipped with pepper spray and a flash unit. After that, just like it was in the movie, Coriolanus went into the arena, found Sejanus, and after having a little chat, they were about to leave, but suddenly one of the tributes, Bobbin, attacked them. His blade glanced off the armor, but sliced Coriolanus' left upper arm, so Coriolanus, defending himself, killed Bobbin by beating him with a piece of wooden plank. This is exactly how it looked like. As some of the other tributes showed up, Coriolanus and Sejanus barely escaped, and half an hour later they were fixed by doctors in Volumnia Gall's lab. On the next day, the mentors were quite confused about what had happened during the night, but nobody had a good guess. Until the late afternoon, nothing happened, but then a girl from District 5, Sol, appeared in the bleachers of the arena. Her mentor decided to send her some food, but as the drones appeared, Mizzen, Coral and Tanner also showed up, and after a brief chase, Sol was stabbed with a trident by Coral and died. Sometime later in the evening, Lucy Gray made an entrance out of the tunnels, and Jessup was chasing her, looking quite ill. As it turns out, back at the zoo he was bitten by a raccoon and got rabies.
Don't call me a raccoon!
I wasn't talking about you. So after the chase, Lucy Gray was cornered in the stands, and Coriolanus decided to send her some water, since she hasn't drunk anything in the past 48 hours. But as the drone was passing over Jessup, he became agitated, took a wooden plank, and hit the drone. Coriolanus and Lysistrata, who was Jessup's mentor, realized that rabies also develop hydrophobia, or fear of water. So Lysistrata made a very noble move. She began to send multiple water bottles to Jessup to make him fall down from the stands. She knew that Jessup was doomed, so she decided to help Lucy Gray win, because as she said, that's what Jessup would want.
Thank you.
As a fleet of drones carrying bottles of water was approaching Jessup, he got scared and fell, breaking his neck immediately. And also, Lysistrata used her remaining gifts on Lucy Gray and sent her quite a lot of water and food, which was bread and cheese, and soon after collecting it, Lucy Gray went back into the tunnels. On the next day, in the morning, Lamina's mentor sent her some food and water, and after the breakfast, she and Reaper made a deal. Since Lamina has been sitting on the beam all this time, being in the sun, her skin got really bad sunburns. So Reaper cut a piece of the flag of Panem and gave it to Lamina to be used as a blanket against the sun rays. And in exchange, Lamina gave Reaper a piece of bread and a piece of cheese. Reaper left, and a few minutes later, Coral, Mizzen, and Tanner showed up in the arena, and their mentors gave them some water and food, such as bread, cheese, and apples. And after having a snack, they decided to have Lamina for dessert. They came up with a plan, and while Tanner was standing under the beam, Coral and Mizzen began climbing the poles. While Lamina was trying to attack Coral, Mizzen managed to reach the beam, but when Tanner threw the trident to him, Mizzen could not catch it, and Lamina took those few seconds to approach Mizzen and strike him into his knee. He fell, but managed to catch himself with one arm. In the meantime, Coral climbed on top, and Tanner threw the trident to her, and she caught it, unlike Mizzen. And after a small fencing round between a trident and an axe, Coral won and drove the weapon into Lamina. She fell and died immediately. Coral and Mizzen climbed down, and then suddenly Coral stabbed Tanner, and Mizzen cut his throat with a knife. That's why teaming up with someone in the games where only one person can win is a bad idea. Sometime later, Tritch showed up, took Lamina's axe, and got some food and water from his mentor. Then, Tesla came out of the tunnels, and took one of the crashed drones, and left again. A few hours later, almost in the evening, Reaper decided to make a nice collection of fallen tributes, so he took Lamina, Tanner, Bobbin, Dill, Sol, and Marcus, and placed them in a row. He didn't take Jessup, apparently being afraid of rabies. Around 8 o'clock, the mentors were dismissed, and Coriolanus met with Dr. Gall, who told him that one of his classmates, Gaius Breen, died because of the complications of his injuries after the bombing, and also she dropped a hint that she was planning to release the snakes into the arena. So Coriolanus, on his way out, dropped a napkin with Lucy Gray's smell into the tank full of snakes. The next morning, one of the tributes, Woovie, made an appearance, holding an empty bottle, but a few minutes later she collapsed and went still. As it turns out, Lucy Gray had poisoned the water and left the bottle in one of the tunnels, where Woovie found it and drank it. A few hours later, Reaper added her to the collection, and then went back into the tunnels. For the rest of the day, nothing else happened, but in the evening, a lot of things did. While Reaper was sitting in the stands, Cirque and Tesla were walking around the arena. Suddenly, two things happened. Trish ran into the arena, intending to attack Cirque and Tesla, and in the same moment, a drone appeared, carrying an uncovered tank full of snakes. The drone released the tank from a height of 10 meters, but rather than shattering, the container bounced on impact. Then, like a flower opening its petals, its walls fell to the ground, and the snakes shot out. Trish and Reaper immediately ran as high up the stands as possible, so they got saved. Tesla managed to climb one of the poles, while Cirque was not so lucky. He was bitten by the snakes, and due to their venom, he died in 10 seconds. A few moments later, as the snakes spread around the arena, Coral and Mizzen ran out of the tunnels, with the snakes chasing them. Mizzen managed to climb the pole as well, and then got on top of the beam, while Coral got bitten by a dozen snakes, and died immediately. A few minutes later, Lucy Gray also showed up from a tunnel, singing, and being followed by snakes. She came to the center of the arena, and sang for 5 or 10 minutes, and snakes didn't attack her. On the contrary, they seemed to be attracted. At that moment, everybody thought that singing was the reason, but in fact, of course it was the napkin, while the snakes can barely even hear. Since all of the snakes got attracted by Lucy Gray, Tesla managed to escape, while Mizzen stayed on top of the beam. Sometime later in the evening, it began raining, so the snakes began to drown in puddles, and Lucy Gray had a chance to escape. But as we will find out later, she actually took one of the snakes and hid it inside her pocket. On the next morning, the arena was full of dead snakes, and Reaper came down to add Cirque and Coral into the collection of fallen tributes. Mizzen, who was sitting on the beam, was sent a few drones with food and water from his mentor. But as the drones were approaching him, Tesla showed up holding a drone attached to her wrist with a long cable. Her drone began to fly in circles, and somehow it managed to hack the other drones, so they began to crash into Mizzen. And because of that, he lost his balance and fell to his death. But Tesla was too excited with the drones, so she didn't notice Trish approaching her, so he splitted her skull open with an axe. Trish hid somewhere, and a few hours later Lucy Gray came, and while Reaper was sleeping, she poisoned the water in the puddle that was used by Reaper as a source of drinking water. But as she was leaving, Trish appeared out of nowhere and tried to attack her with an axe. But Lucy Gray jumped towards him, took a snake out of the pocket, and planted it into his neck, so a few seconds later, Trish was dead. Several hours later, when Reaper woke up, Lucy Gray decided to exhaust him by tampering with the bodies of the dead tributes. So after she dragged Trish around a little bit, and also took the flak off the bodies several times, Reaper, after fixing that, got tired and drank some poisoned water from the puddle, and a minute later he threw up and died. But since back at those times they didn't have trackers, the game makers had to wait to check if Reaper was actually dead. So only after 30 minutes, when Lucy Gray herself came to Reaper and checked his pulse, or to be exact, the lack of it, the 10th Hunger Games were officially over, and Lucy Gray was the winner.
You can kiss my ass!
Later, while exiting the arena, she was searched by peacekeepers, who found the compact given by Coriolanus Snow, and life of Coriolanus changed forever. But that's a whole different story. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, I would appreciate if you subscribe to my channel. If you have any questions about the story or the characters, please ask me in the comments. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next week.